Well, it could be a whole new way to get to work fast. Later this morning, the federal government will announce details of plans for a high-speed rail for the eastern seaboard. But deciding on the route, getting the land and the cost are just some of the questions likely to trouble the planners. The Australasian Railway Association is a lobby group for railway operators and track owners, and its head Bryan Nye joins us from Canberra. Bryan Nye, good morning. There have been various incarnations of this idea that have been around for several decades. What's different about this proposal?
Well, I think it is an exciting proposal, but the big thing that's different this time, this is not a feasibility study, it's an implementation study, implementing the timeframes, the track that's required, and is actually going to identify the corridor that suits it best. And I think that's quite exciting. I mean, Australia sorely needs this, and it's now it's got to say, well, how we go about doing it and when do we do it?
Well, it's not cheap, and this study confirms that a cost of up to $108 billion. How would such a huge project be funded?
Well, I think you've got to look at it in comparison to what other expenditure's been by government. Since 1985, the government spent $293 billion on the road network. And everybody knows that we can't continue building more roads and congesting the roads. So it won't be $110 billion right up front. It'll be built in stages, and probably likely the first stage is Newcastle, Sydney, Sydney, Canberra. That's around a figure of $20 billion. And you think if we build that high-speed rail network, would we need to build a second Sydney airport, which in itself would cost more than $30 billion? So I think, what is the long-term benefit of Australia? And I think you'll find this stacks up incredibly well.
And would there be private sector involvement?
I think that's what the second stage of the study is about, is looking how you can finance it. Obviously, the government would have to identify the land, resume the land, but there are many models around the world where private sector are involved in the financing and the funding. So I think it would be a ideal public-private partnership. But the fact is that this study actually says we need it, and now let's get on with the implementation.
You mentioned getting the land to build these tracks, and I understand that land issues have been what has stopped previous plans in the past. How do you get around those problems?
Well, that's why the federal government is actually moving to a detailed analysis in the second phase of actually identifying exactly how much land they're needed. And it'll be interesting to see. Some people will be arguing that it should go through their towns, others will be saying it shouldn't go through theirs. But the fact is, we need a new corridor. A rail corridor in the modern technology is a lot quieter than even the road network. So I think you can tunnel, you can go above land. I think the land, getting the corridor now, if we don't do it now, we'll never have it, and we know we need it.
How much interest do you think there would really be from people to use the high-speed rail, given that plane tickets between some of these cities that we're talking about can be as low as $19 sometimes on specials that airlines are offering?
I think we've got to say, look, even if you started to build this high-speed railway now, it'll be many years before you actually get it up and running. And the fact is that rising fuel costs, the carbon, the emissions thing, the airline travel will go up in cost. The good thing about high-speed rail is that it's used electricity and it's environmentally friendly. So around the world where there is high-speed rail competing with airlines, you find airlines no longer operate. Paris to London, 90% of the people going between those two cities now go by rail, and there's no competition.
So the study actually says that ticket prices for Sydney to Melbourne, for example, could be around $100 to $200. Do you think that people would be prepared to part with that kind of money? And how long do you think it will be before they'll actually be getting on a train like that?
Well, already we tend to look at the airline prices at the bottom end of the market. I know a business class fare, and the business travellers all pay in excess of $300 to travel between those cities. So it has always been on the assumption that fast rail has to compete with airlines if it's going to have the patronage. When we would begin, I think the needs for a second Sydney airport would push this starting, and I believe that within 10 years we will have a high-speed network, particularly between Newcastle, Sydney and Canberra.
Bryan Nye, thanks very much for your time this morning.
My pleasure.